The morning sun rose over the small colony of Alara's Hope, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that reflected off the glass windows of the medical clinic at the center of town. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood at the window with a cup of coffee in her hands, watching the farmers walk toward their fields with tools over their shoulders and smiles on their faces. This was why she had come here, she thought to herself. This peace, this quiet, this simple life far away from everything she had known before. The colony of Alara's Hope sat on a frontier world called Verdana 7, a planet covered in rolling green hills and forests that reminded Elena of pictures she had seen of Earth long ago. 40,000 people lived here, most of them farmers and craftsmen and teachers and children who had never known war or conflict or the terrible things that happened in the darker corners of the galaxy. Elena liked it that way. She turned from the window when she heard small footsteps behind her, and she smiled at the young girl who came running into the room with her hair still messy from sleep. "Good morning, Kira," Elena said warmly, kneeling down to fix the girl's collar. Kira was 10 years old with bright eyes and a curious mind, an orphan who had arrived on a transport ship 3 years ago with nowhere to go and no one to care for her. Elena had taken her in without a second thought, and now the clinic felt empty whenever Kira was not there, filling it with her laughter and her endless questions about the universe. "Are there patients today?" Kira asked, bouncing on her feet with energy that Elena wished she could bottle and sell. "A few," Elena replied, standing up and taking the girl's hand. "Mr. Patterson needs his medicine refilled, and Mrs. Chen wants me to look at her grandson's cough." "Can I help?" "You can hand me the bandages if I need them." Kira grinned like Elena had given her the greatest gift in the world, and together they walked into the main room of the clinic where the beds were empty, and the machines hummed quietly in the corner. This was Elena's kingdom, small and humble but filled with purpose. She had been a doctor in the core worlds once, working in massive hospitals that served millions of people, and dealt with injuries and diseases that would make most people faint just hearing about them. But she had left that life behind, choosing instead to come to this forgotten corner of human space, where the biggest emergency was usually a broken arm or a fever that would not go away. Some people thought she was running from something, and maybe they were right in a way she would never admit out loud. The morning passed slowly and peacefully, with patients coming and going and Kira handing Elena tools with the seriousness of a surgeon's assistant. Around noon, Mayor Thomas Bright stopped by to chat, a friendly man with gray hair and worried eyes who always seemed to carry the weight of the colony on his shoulders. "Any news from the supply ships?" Elena asked him while she organized her medicine cabinet. "They say the next shipment will be here in 2 weeks," the mayor replied, sitting down heavily in a chair that creaked under him. "We are running low on some things, but nothing critical." "And the patrol reports?" The mayor waved his hand like he was swatting away a fly. "Nothing out there but empty space and distant stars, same as always." Elena nodded, but something in her chest felt tight in a way she could not explain. The colony had only one old patrol ship and a volunteer militia made up of farmers who had never fired their weapons at anything more dangerous than wild animals. If trouble ever came to Verdana 7, they would be helpless. But trouble never came to places like this, Elena reminded herself. That was the whole point of living on the frontier where no one important ever looked. After the mayor left, Elena's communicator beeped with an incoming message from the subspace relay station in orbit. She glanced at the sender identification, and her blood turned cold for just a moment before she forced herself to breathe normally. The message was from her sister. Elena walked into her private office and closed the door before opening the message, her hands trembling slightly as words appeared on the small screen. "Elena, I hope you are well. I worry about you out there on the edge of everything. Please consider coming home. or at least moving somewhere with better defenses. I have heard rumors about alien activity in the frontier sectors, and I do not like it, your sister, Sunyi. Alina read the message twice before deleting it and putting the communicator away. Her sister meant well, she always did, but Sunyi did not understand that Alina had come to Verdana 7 specifically to escape the world her sister lived in. Admiral Sunyi Vasquez-Chen was the most famous military commander in human history, a woman whose name made enemies tremble and allies stand a little taller. The Butcher of Proxima, they called her, though never to her face, the woman who had crushed 3 alien invasions and had never lost a single battle in her entire career. She commanded the first Terran expeditionary fleet, 200 warships that could reduce entire planets to ash if she gave the order. And she was Alina's older sister. They had grown up together on the same streets, played the same games, shared the same dreams before their paths had split in different directions. Sunyi had chosen war, and Alina had chosen healing, and now they lived in 2 different universes that only occasionally touched through messages sent across the stars. Alina did not want to be the Admiral's sister out here. She wanted to be just Alina, the doctor who fixed broken bones and gave children medicine and watched the sunset with her adopted daughter. That evening, Alina and Kira sat on the porch of their small home next to the clinic, eating dinner and watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "Do you think there are people on those stars?" Kira asked, pointing upward with her fork. "Many of them," Alina replied. "Humans and aliens and creatures we have not even discovered yet." "Are they nice?" Alina paused, thinking about her answer carefully. "Some of them are very nice, and some of them are not, just like people everywhere." Kira seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to her food, humming a song she had learned at school. Alina looked up at the stars and felt that tightness in her chest again, stronger this time, like a warning she could not quite hear. And then she saw it. A light in the sky that was not a star, moving too fast and too purposefully, followed by another and another, until the darkness above them was filled with shapes descending through the atmosphere. Ships, Alina realized with horror rising in her throat, warships emerging from hyperspace directly above the colony. Kira grabbed her hand, fear replacing the curiosity in her eyes. "What is that?" the girl whispered. Alina pulled Kira close, her mind racing through possibilities and finding none of them good. "Go inside," she said, her voice steady despite the terror building inside her. "Go to the basement and hide. Do not come out until I come for you." "But now, Kira." The girl ran inside, and Alina stood alone on her porch watching shadows fall across her peaceful colony as massive alien vessels blocked out the stars. Somewhere deep inside her, in a place she had tried to bury for years, a small voice whispered something that was not quite fear. It whispered, "My sister is going to burn worlds for this." The first explosions came before dawn, shaking the ground so hard that windows shattered and buildings cracked down the middle. Alina had spent the night in the clinic preparing for what she knew was coming, gathering medical supplies and setting up beds, and trying not to think about the child hiding in her basement who must be so scared. The alien ships had not announced themselves or demanded surrender, or done any of the things that civilized invaders were supposed to do. They had simply appeared in the sky like predators circling wounded prey, and then they had begun their attack. The Dominion of Veloth had ruled 1,000 star systems for 10,000 years, an ancient empire built on conquest and slavery, and the absolute belief that they were superior to every other species in the galaxy. To them, humanity was nothing more than a young and foolish race that had wandered too far from its home, easy targets for expansion, resources to be harvested. And Verdana 7 was simply another world to be pacified. Commander Zorvath stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the assault unfold on holographic screens that showed thermal images of the colony below. He was tall even for a Veloth, with gray skin and 4 eyes that blinked in patterns humans would find unsettling. And he wore the ceremonial armor of a fleet commander who had conquered dozens of worlds before this one. "Status report," he said in a voice that sounded like grinding stones. "Ground forces have landed in 7 locations," his adjutant subcommander Lees replied. "Resistance is minimal. Their militia is pathetic. We estimate full pacification within 3 hours." Zorveth made a sound that might have been a laugh. 3 hours for 40,000 primitives. We grow slow in our old age. They have no military installations, no defensive systems, no weapons worth mentioning. This is not a conquest, Commander. It is a harvest. Down on the surface, the harvest was brutal. Veloth soldiers marched through the streets of Alara's Hope in formations that moved like machines, their weapons cutting down anyone who resisted and capturing everyone who did not. Mayor Thomas Bright tried to meet them with a white flag and words of peace, hoping that surrender might spare his people from the worst of it. They shot him in the town square and left his body there as a message. Alina heard the screams from inside her clinic, where she was treating the first wave of wounded, farmers and shopkeepers and children, who had been caught in the crossfire of an invasion they had done nothing to deserve. Her hands moved automatically, stitching wounds and applying bandages and injecting painkillers, while her mind tried to stay focused on the task in front of her instead of the horror happening outside. A young man with burns on his arms grabbed her sleeve with desperate strength. "Doctor, you have to run," he gasped. "They are taking everyone, putting them in transports. We heard them say they want workers for their mines." "I am not leaving my patients," Alina replied firmly, "and I am not leaving my daughter." The door to the clinic exploded inward before she could say anything else, and Veloth soldiers poured through the opening with weapons raised and commands shouted in a language that sounded like cracking ice. Alina stepped in front of her patients with her arms spread wide, placing herself between the aliens and the wounded humans behind her. "These people need medical attention," she said loudly, forcing her voice not to shake. "Whatever you want from this colony, killing the injured will not help you get it." One of the soldiers stepped forward, taller than the others with markings on his armor that suggested rank. He looked at Alina like she was an insect that had dared to speak in his presence. "You are in no position to make demands, human." "I am not making demands, I am stating facts. A dead worker is worth nothing to your minds." The officer considered this for a moment, and Alina could see the calculation happening behind his 4 cold eyes. Then he struck her across the face with the back of his armored hand, sending her crashing to the floor with blood pouring from her split lip. "You will learn to speak only when permitted," he said, standing over her. "Take them all. The wounded can be healed later if they survive transport." Alina was dragged out of her clinic along with everyone else, her hands bound behind her back with restraints that hummed with energy and burned when she moved too much. They threw her into a transport ship with dozens of other colonists, packed together like cargo in a hold that smelled of fear and blood, and the ozone scent of alien technology. She searched frantically for Kira among the faces around her, but the girl was not there. Please let her still be hiding. Alina prayed silently, please let her be safe. Hours passed in the darkness of the transport hold before they were transferred to a larger ship in orbit, processed through scanners and databases and procedures designed to strip away their identities and turn them into numbered resources. Alina gave her name when asked, Alina Vasquez. A Veloth technician entered the information into a console without looking at her, just another human among thousands being cataloged for service to the Dominion. But somewhere in the vast network of Veloth intelligence systems, that name triggered a flag that had been placed there years ago by analysts who tracked potential leverage points against enemy commanders. The flag reached Subcommander Lees 3 hours after the initial invasion, was declared complete. He read the report once, then read it again, then felt something he had not experienced in decades of military service: genuine fear. "Commander," he said, entering Zorvath's quarters with the data pad clutched in his trembling hands, "we have a problem." Zorvath looked up from his victory meal with annoyance. "The colony is secured. There are no problems." One of the prisoners, a doctor named Elena Vasquez, Lise paused, trying to find words that would not sound insane. "She is the sister of Admiral Sunyi Vasquez Chen." The name hung in the air like poison gas. Even Zorvath, who had conquered worlds and crushed rebellions and faced death 100 times, knew that name. The Butcher of Proxima, the woman who had destroyed 3 fleets sent against humanity and had sworn to end any species that threatened human colonies. "Impossible," Zorvath said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Why would the Admiral's sister be on a worthless frontier colony?" "To hide, Commander, to stay safe and anonymous, and we have just captured her, struck her, and put her in chains." Zorvath stood slowly, his appetite for celebration suddenly gone. "The humans do not know we have her, if we release her quietly." Glees shook his head. "The Admiral will know by now. She has spies everywhere, and even if she does not know the details, she knows her sister's colony has fallen." As if to prove his words true, an alarm began wailing throughout the ship. The communications officer's voice came through speakers filled with static and terror. "Commander, we have lost contact with all relay stations in this sector. Something is jamming our long-range communications, and our deep space sensors are detecting. The voice cut off. Zorvath rushed to the bridge and looked at the sensor display with all 4 of his eyes wide in disbelief. Ships were coming out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Human ships, warships, more of them than he had ever seen gathered in one place. And at the center of the formation, a vessel so large it made his flagship look like a toy. The flagship of the 1st Terran Expeditionary Fleet. She had come, and she had brought everyone. Admiral Sunyi Vasquez Chen had been reviewing fleet reports in her quarters when the message arrived. A routine evening on the flagship, unconquerable, that she had expected to end with tea and sleep. Then her personal communicator buzzed with a priority alert from Terran intelligence, and the world she knew shattered into pieces. "VERDANA 7 colony under attack." The message read, "VA Dominion FORCES confirmed. 40,000 CIVILINS, including Dr. ELENA VASQZ." She read her sister's name 3 times before the words made sense. For a long moment that felt like years, the Admiral sat perfectly still in her chair, while something cold and terrible awakened in the deepest part of her heart. Her staff would later describe what happened next as the calmest display of rage they had ever witnessed. The Admiral walked to the bridge of the Unconquerable with steps that made no sound and a face that showed no expression, and every officer who saw her felt the temperature drop by several degrees. "Status of all ships in the fleet," she said in a voice like winter wind. Her executive officer, Commander Harris, jumped to attention. "All 200 vessels at full readiness, Admiral. We are currently set course for Verdana 7. Maximum emergency burn all ships." Harris hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "Admiral, Verdana 7 is 3 weeks away at standard." "I said maximum emergency burn, Commander. Push the engines past safety limits. I do not care if we burn out half the fleet getting there. We will arrive in 4 days, or I will know the reason why." "Yes, Admiral." She turned to her communications officer. "Open a channel to Terran High Command. Authorization Obsidian." The bridge fell silent at that word. Condition Obsidian was a protocol that existed only in theory, a state of total war that had never been activated in the history of the United Terran Navy. It meant no rules, no restraint, no mercy. "Admiral," the communications officer said carefully, "Obsidian requires Senate approval." The Senate will approve it. Open the channel." Within an hour, every ship in the first Terran Expeditionary Fleet had changed course and pushed their engines into the red zone that engineers called Suicide Rain. Within 3 hours, the Terran Senate had convened an emergency session and granted Admiral Vasquez Chen unlimited authority to respond to the attack on Verdana 7. Within 6 hours, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th fleets had received orders to mobilize and prepare for extended combat operations. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space between the stars, the fastest ships humanity had ever built were racing toward a small colony where a doctor sat in chains wondering if her sister would come. The Veloth Dominion was not idle during those 4 days. Commander Zorvath sent desperate messages to High Command requesting reinforcements, and the Dominion responded by dispatching 80 warships to defend their new conquest. They arrived at Verdana 2 days before the human fleet, forming a defensive perimeter around the planet that their commanders believed would be more than enough to repel any rescue attempt. Ambassador Velan, the senior diplomat assigned to human affairs, attempted to open negotiations through back channels. He sent a message directly to the Admiral offering to return all prisoners unharmed in exchange for recognition of Veloth claims to the frontier territories. The Admiral's response was 5 words: "You touched what was mine." Velan sent a second message explaining that the attack had been a mistake, that the Dominion had not known Alina's identity, that they were willing to offer compensation and formal apologies. This time there was no response at all. On Verdana 7, Alina had been moved to a holding facility with other prisoners deemed valuable enough to keep alive. The guards talked freely in front of them, assuming the humans could not understand their language, but Alina had studied xenolinguistics during her medical training and could follow enough to piece together what was happening. A human fleet was coming, they said, bigger than anything the Veloth had faced in centuries, led by a woman whose name they spoke in whispers like a curse. Alina closed her eyes and felt tears running down her cheeks, though whether from relief or guilt she could not say. Other prisoners noticed her reaction and gathered around her in the darkness of their cell. "You know something," an old farmer named Peter said. "What is happening out there?" Alina wiped her face and looked at the frightened people surrounding her, people who had lost their homes and their freedom and their hope in a single terrible night. "My sister is coming," she said quietly. "Your sister," Peters repeated with confusion. "What can one woman do against all of this?" Alina almost laughed, a strange sound in a place filled with so much suffering. "My sister is Admiral Sunyi Vasquez Chen, commander of the 1st Terran Fleet, and when she gets here, these aliens are going to learn why you should never threaten a human's family." The news spread through the prisoner population like wildfire, and for the first time since the invasion began, Alina saw something other than despair in their eyes. Hope was a powerful thing. 4 days after the invasion, exactly as the Admiral had promised, the 1st Terran Expeditionary Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Verdana system. Zorvath watched the sensor data with all 4 eyes locked on the display, counting ships as they appeared one after another after another. 200 human warships arranged in an attack formation that left no room for negotiation, 12 Titan-class dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in the Veloth fleet, and at the center of it, all the massive shape of the Unconquerable leading the charge. "They outnumber us almost 3-1, Sub-Commander Lee said with something close to panic in his voice. "Hold formation," Zorvath commanded. "Our ships are superior to their primitive technology. We will make them pay for every meter they advance." On the bridge of the Unconquerable, Admiral Vasquez Chen stood before the main view screen with her hands clasped behind her back, and her eyes fixed on the enemy fleet blocking her path to her sister. "Admiral," Commander Harris said, "the Veloth are hailing us. They want to negotiate." "Ignore them. They may offer to surrender," I do not want their surrender, Commander. I want them to understand what happens when you harm my family. All ships weapons free. Attack pattern Omega, no mercy. The First Fleet did not slow down as it approached the Veloth defensive line. They accelerated. Human ships slammed into the enemy formation like a hammer striking glass, firing every weapon they had at point-blank range, while ignoring losses that would have made any other fleet retreat. Admiral Vasquez Chen directed the battle from her command chair with cold precision, sending ships to their deaths without hesitation if it meant breaking through the enemy faster. Titan Group 2, concentrate fire on their flagship. I want Zorvath alive if possible, dead if necessary. Destroyer Squadrons 7 through 12, you are cleared to ram if your weapons fail. All Marines prepare for planetary assault. We will be in orbit within the hour. The Veloth had never faced an enemy like this. Other species fought for territory or resources or survival, rational motivations that made their tactics predictable. Humans fought like they had nothing to lose, throwing themselves into the fire with a fury that seemed almost insane. In 47 minutes, the Battle of Verdana 7 was over. 63 Veloth warships had been destroyed, including Commander Zorvath's flagship, which was disabled and boarded by Terran Marines who found the commander hiding in an escape pod. Only 3 Veloth vessels managed to escape the system, fleeing into hyperspace with stories that would terrify their civilization for generations. The Admiral watched the last enemy ship disappear from her sensors, then turned to her communications officer. Open a channel to the surface. Her voice echoed across the planet below, reaching every speaker and every communicator and every prisoner huddled in Veloth holding cells. This is Admiral Sunyi Vasquez-Chen of the United Terran Navy. I am coming for my sister, and anyone who stands in my way will die. That is not a threat. It is a promise. In her cell, Alina heard her sister's voice and smiled through her tears. The Admiral had come, and she had brought hell with her. The dropships fell from the sky like metal rain, each one carrying 50 Terran Marines in full combat armor ready to tear apart anyone who stood between them and the prisoners below. Alina heard the explosions in the distance growing closer, and she gathered the other prisoners in the corner of their cell as far from the door as possible. Stay down and stay quiet, she told them. The Marines do not always check who they are shooting at in the first few seconds. Old man Peters looked at her with wide eyes. How do you know that? I grew up with soldiers, trust me. The facility shook as something massive landed on the roof, and then the ceiling collapsed in a shower of concrete and metal and dust that filled the air so thick Alina could barely breathe. Veloth guards rushed toward the breach with weapons raised, but they never had a chance to fire. Marines poured through the opening like water through a broken dam, their armor deflecting the few shots that reached them, while their own weapons cut down everything in their path. Alina watched a guard who had struck one of the prisoners yesterday get hit by 3 rounds and collapse in a heap that stopped moving. She felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The battle for the holding facility lasted less than 10 minutes, and then the dust settled, and a Marine sergeant was kneeling in front of Alina's cell with a scanner in his hands. Dr. Vasquez, he said, his voice distorted by his helmet speakers, are you injured? Nothing serious. There is a girl, a child named Kira. She was hiding in the basement of my clinic when the invasion started. I need to know if she is safe. The sergeant spoke into his communicator, and a moment later his posture relaxed slightly. Confirmed, the girl was found by First Wave teams 2 hours ago. She is unharmed and asking for you. Alina's legs went weak with relief, and she had to grab the bars of her cell to stay standing. Thank you, she whispered, thank you. The Marines freed the prisoners and led them to a staging area, outside the facility where medical teams were already setting up to treat the wounded. Alina helped where she could, her doctor's instincts taking over even though her hands were shaking, and her mind was still processing everything that had happened. She was bandaging an old woman's arm when she felt a presence behind her, and she turned to find a figure in Admiral's dress uniform standing 3 feet away. Sunyi looked older than the last time they had seen each other, with more gray in her hair and more lines around her eyes, but she stood with the same perfect posture and the same unreadable expression that had made her famous throughout the galaxy. The sisters stared at each other for a long moment. Then Sunyi's mask cracked, and she crossed the distance between them in 2 steps and wrapped Alina in an embrace so tight it hurt. "I thought I lost you," Sunyi said, her voice breaking on the words. "When I got the report, I thought." "I know," Alina replied, holding her sister just as tightly. "I am here, I am alive, you came." "Of course I came, I will always come." They stood there for what felt like hours, 2 sisters reunited in the ruins of a colony that had been peaceful just 5 days ago. Finally Sunyi pulled back and looked at Alina's face, her eyes stopping on the split lip and the bruise that had spread across her cheek. "Who did that?" Alina knew that tone, had known it since they were children, and Sunyi had defended her against bullies in the schoolyard, with a ferocity that seemed impossible for someone so young. "One of the officers, I do not know his name." "What did he look like?" "Sunyi." "What did he look like, Alina?" Alina described the officer who had struck her in the clinic, the tall one with the rank markings who had called her an insect, and told her to speak only when permitted. Sunyi listened without expression, then nodded once and spoke into her communicator. "Find a Veloth officer matching that description. Bring him to me alive." Alina grabbed her sister's arm. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing he does not deserve." "Sunyi, please, this is not who I want you to be." The Admiral looked at her sister with something like sadness in her eyes. "This is who I have always been, Alina. You know that. I protect my family, and anyone who hurts my family pays the price." Later that day, Alina was reunited with Kira in a temporary shelter set up by the relief teams. The girl ran into her arms crying and laughing at the same time, clinging to Alina like she was afraid to let go even for a second. "I was so scared," Kira sobbed. "I stayed in the basement like you said, but I heard the explosions and the screaming and I thought you were dead." "I am right here," Alina said, stroking the girl's hair. "I am right here and I am not going anywhere." "Promise." "I promise." That night, while Alina slept with Kira curled up beside her, Admiral Vasquez-Chen addressed the Terran Senate via secure channel from the Bridge of the Unconquerable. "The Veloth Dominion has committed an act of war against the people of the United Terran Federation," she said, her voice carrying to every senator in the chamber. "They invaded a peaceful colony, murdered civilians, and enslaved our citizens for their mines. I ask this body for a formal declaration of war and authorization to pursue the enemy into their own territory." The vote was unanimous. By morning, the news had spread across human space and beyond. Humanity was going to war, not for resources or territory or strategic advantage, but because an ancient empire had made the mistake of herding 40,000 farmers on a world no one had ever heard of. Ambassador Velen watched the declaration from his office on Calith Prime, the throne world of the Veloth Dominion, and felt the cold grip of despair closing around his hearts. He had warned them. He had told High Command that humans were different, that they did not think like other species, that they would not calculate costs and benefits like rational beings. But no one had listened. Now the Admiral's fleet was not returning home to celebrate their victory. It was advancing deeper into Veloth space, and behind it, the second and third and fourth fleets were mobilizing for what promised to be the largest military campaign in human history. The Emperor summoned his war council to discuss their response, and the room filled with generals and admirals who had conquered 1,000 worlds over 10,000 years. "We will crush them," one general declared. "They caught us by surprise at Verdana, nothing more. Our full military strength will sweep them aside like dust." "You do not understand," Velen said quietly, and everyone turned to look at him. "This is not a war of conquest for them. They are not trying to take our territory or our resources." "Then what do they want?" Velen thought about the Admiral's response to his peace offering, 5 words that had chilled him to his core. "You touched what was mine." "They want us to suffer," he said. "They want to punish us for what we did to that colony, and they will not stop until they feel we have suffered enough." "That is madness." "No, that is humanity." The War Council argued for hours, but none of their strategies mattered anymore. The humans were coming, and they had brought a rage that would reshape the galaxy forever. 6 months had passed since the invasion of Verdana 7, and the galaxy would never be the same. The war between humanity and the Veloth Dominion had spread across 100 star systems, leaving trails of burning ships and shattered worlds in its wake. But it was not truly a war. Ambassador Velen realized as he watched another fleet report come in showing catastrophic losses. It was an execution. The humans did not fight like any enemy the Dominion had faced in 10,000 years of conquest. They did not seek to occupy territory or capture resources or force surrender through exhaustion. They simply destroyed everything the Veloth military sent against them, and then moved on to the next target, leaving crippled shipyards and burning bases in their wake. Admiral Vasquez-Chen commanded the campaign from the Bridge of the Unconquerable, which had become a symbol of human vengeance that Veloth commanders learned to fear above all else. Where her flagship appeared, defeat was certain. She had developed a strategy that her officers called the Obsidian Doctrine: identify enemy military assets, destroy them completely, do not negotiate, do not accept surrender, leave nothing that could threaten humanity again. The Veloth Emperor attempted to end the war twice in those 6 months. The first time, he sent a delegation offering territorial concessions and reparations that would have been considered generous in any normal conflict. Admiral Vasquez-Chen did not respond, and her fleet continued its advance. The second time, the Emperor himself recorded a message acknowledging Veloth responsibility for the attack on Verdana 7 and begging for peace talks. The Admiral's response came 3 days later: unconditional surrender, full disarmament, release of all slaves in your empire, public admission of your crimes. Anything less and we continue until there is nothing left. Some in the Veloth leadership wanted to fight to the last ship, to preserve their honor even in defeat. But as the months passed and the human fleets pushed deeper into Dominion territory, even the most stubborn generals began to understand that honor meant nothing if there was no one left to remember it. The end came on a cold morning on Calith Prime, the ancient throne world of the Veloth Dominion, where emperors had ruled for millennia. Human ships filled the sky above the capital city, so many that they blocked out the sun and cast the world into artificial twilight. Admiral Vasquez-Chen descended to the surface in a shuttle escorted by 100 fighters, and she walked up the steps of the Imperial Palace with an honor guard of Marines who had fought beside her through every battle of the campaign. The Emperor waited at the top of the steps, old and tired and broken in ways that went far beyond his physical appearance. Beside him stood the few members of his court who had not fled, and behind them loomed the empty palace that had once hosted celebrations of conquest, and now stood as a monument to defeat. "Admiral," the Emperor said, his voice cracking with age and exhaustion, "I am prepared to accept your terms." "All of them. All of them." The Treaty of Obsidian was signed that afternoon on a table placed in front of the palace for all to see. The Veloth Dominion agreed to complete disarmament, reducing their military to a small defensive force that could never again threaten their neighbors. They agreed to pay reparations to Verdana 7 and every other human world they had attacked, amounts so large they would take generations to pay off. They agreed to release every slave in their empire, millions of beings from dozens of species who had suffered under Veloth rule for centuries. And they agreed to a public admission of guilt that would be broadcast across the galaxy, a formal acknowledgement that they had attacked a peaceful human colony without provocation and had been justly punished for their crime. As the Emperor signed the final document, Admiral Vasquez-Chen spoke words that would be remembered long after everyone present had turned to dust. "Let this serve as a lesson to every species in the galaxy," she said, her voice carrying through speakers to every corner of Calith Prime and beyond. "Humanity does not seek war. We do not desire conquest. We ask only to live in peace among the stars. But harm our people, threaten our families, attack what we love, and we will end you. This is not a threat, it is a promise, and the Veloth Dominion stands as proof that we keep our promises." Across the galaxy, representatives of 100 alien nations watched the broadcast and understood that something fundamental had changed. The humans were not the young and foolish species they had assumed. They were something far more dangerous, a people who loved deeply and protected fiercely and never forgot when they were wronged. 3 months after the treaty was signed, Elena Vasquez returned to Verdana 7 with Kira by her side. The colony had been rebuilt with Veloth reparations money, new homes and schools and clinics rising from the ashes of the old ones, and the 40,000 survivors had been joined by new settlers who wanted to help restore what had been lost. Elena reopened her medical practice in a building that stood on the same spot as her original clinic, and she fell back into the rhythm of treating patients and watching sunsets, and raising a daughter who grew braver and stronger every day. Sunyi visited on a warm evening 6 months after Elena's return, arriving in a personal shuttle instead of a warship for the first time in years. The sisters sat on Elena's porch drinking tea, while Kira played in the garden, chasing fireflies that glowed with bioluminescent light in the gathering darkness. "The Senate wants to give me a medal," Sunyi said, watching the stars appear one by one above them. "Will you accept it?" "I do not know what we did to the Veloth. I am not sure it deserves celebration." Elena looked at her sister, seeing the weight she carried behind her eyes, the burden of all those decisions and all those deaths. "You protected your people." "I burned down an empire because someone hit my sister." "Yes." Sonia turned to meet Elena's gaze, searching for judgment and finding none. "Does that make me a monster?" Elena thought about the question for a long moment, thinking about everything she had seen and everything she had lost and everything she had regained. "It makes you my sister," she finally said, "and I would not change that for anything in the universe." They sat together in silence after that, two women who had taken different paths through life, but remained connected by bonds that nothing could break. Kira brought them more tea as the night deepened, and the fireflies danced in the garden, and somewhere far away the Veloth were learning to live in a galaxy where they were no longer the predators. In a Veloth academy decades later, long after both sisters had passed into history, a professor stood before a class of young officers and taught them about the human axiom. "Never forget what happened to us," he said. "Never forget why it happened. The humans do not fight for glory or territory or resources. They fight for each other, for their families, for their homes. Touch what they love and they will make you regret it with every fiber of their being." A young student raised her hand. "Professor, is it true that the great humbling started because of one human colony?" The professor shook his head slowly. "No, it started because of one human sister, and that is the lesson you must carry with you for the rest of your lives. Humans are not dangerous because of their ships or their weapons or their numbers. They are dangerous because they love without limit, and they will burn the galaxy to protect what they love." The class sat in stunned silence. And somewhere on a green world called Verdana 7, a statue stood in the town square of Elara's Hope. It showed two women standing side by side, one in a doctor's coat and one in an admiral's uniform, their hands clasped together as they faced the future. The plaque at its base reads simply, "For family." And the colony thrived under stars that had once been filled with conquest and now shone with the promise of peace. Because one sister had healed and one sister had fought, and together they had taught the galaxy what it truly meant to be human.